What draws us underground is rarely stone alone. It is the older question hidden inside the stone. What survives when light disappears? Across centuries, people have stood at the mouths of caves and felt the same quiet pull. Not simply fear, not even wonder. Something more intimate than that. The sense that the earth remembers things we have forgotten, and that now and then it opens a door. Some openings are small enough to miss. A crack in a hillside, a shaft behind a basement wall, a dark pool in clear water. Others arrive with legend already attached to them, wrapped in stories of vanished worlds, sacred chambers, lost cities, or things no map was meant to hold. We tell ourselves these are only stories, and often they are. Yet again and again, the descent reveals something real waiting beneath the metaphor. An ecosystem sealed away for ages, a passage no one expected, a room shaped by hands long gone, a depth that resists easy explanation. That is what makes caves so enduring in the human imagination. They are physical places, but they also behave like questions. Every tunnel asks what lies beyond certainty. Every chamber reminds us how narrow our daily world can be. We live on the bright surface, surrounded by clocks, roads, and names. Beneath us, another order of time continues without permission. Minerals grow for 500,000 years. Water redraws continents grain by grain. Life learns to survive without the sun. This is not a journey about monsters or myths dressed up as facts. It is about the boundary between knowledge and humility. About the moments when discovery unsettles us because it expands the world faster than our language can keep pace. In the stories ahead, caves will lead to hidden ecosystems, drowned passages, impossible architecture, and legends that refuse to die. And with each descent, the same question will follow us into the dark. When the earth keeps a secret for long enough, does it become history, mystery, or something closer to memory? What if the first truly alien world we found was not in the stars, but under a quiet field in Romania? In 1986, workers near the Black Sea were surveying land for a power project when they broke into a sealed cavern that had been cut off from the surface for millions of years. It did not welcome them with grandeur. There were no cathedral chambers, no glittering walls, no heroic sense of discovery. Instead, there was stale air, chemical fumes, and a silence so complete it felt less like emptiness than exclusion. This was Movile Cave, and almost everything about it challenged ordinary assumptions about life. The oxygen was scarce. Hydrogen sulfide and carbon dioxide hung in the air. Sunlight had not touched its depths for roughly 5.5 million years. By the logic of the surface world, it should have been nearly barren, but it was alive. Researchers found a hidden community of organisms that had evolved in total darkness. Pale spiders, water scorpions, leeches, and other invertebrates unlike anything in the nearby landscape. Many existed nowhere else on Earth. More astonishing still, this ecosystem did not depend on the sun. At its foundation were bacteria feeding on chemical reactions, building an entire food web from the minerals and gases of the cave itself. It is one thing to imagine that life adapts. It is another to witness life rewriting the rules. Movile suggests that evolution is not just resilient, but patient beyond our comprehension. Given time, isolation, and the barest opportunity, living systems will improvise. They will invent strange bodies for strange worlds. That is why the cave feels larger than its narrow passages. It changes the scale of the question. If one hidden chamber beneath Romania could shelter a separate experiment in life for millions of years, what else might be unfolding where we have never looked? Perhaps the most unsettling discoveries are not the ones that prove we are alone, but the ones that show how many versions of life the Earth has been capable of imagining without us. It started with a hole in the seafloor, almost casual in appearance, as if the ocean had simply exhaled and left a wound behind. Off the coast of Belize, fishermen had known the place for generations. From above, it looked unreal, a nearly perfect blue circle cut into the lighter reef like an iris staring back at the sky. The Great Blue Hole has been photographed so often that it risks becoming familiar, a beautiful image emptied of its power. But familiarity is a surface illusion. Beneath that calm geometry lies a descent through layers of time. As divers moved downward, the water changed. Light thinned, color withdrew. Then came the deeper evidence that this place had not always been underwater. Massive stalactites hung from ledges far below the sea's surface. Mineral icicles formed in dry air during an ancient ice age, when sea levels were far lower, and this chamber stood as a limestone cave on land. The ocean arrived later, rising slowly enough to drown a landscape without erasing its memory. That is what makes the Blue Hole more than a geological wonder. It is a flooded archive. Each layer holds a chapter from a world that no longer exists in the same form. Scientists studying its depths have found signs of changing climate, shifting oceans, and oxygen-poor zones where little can survive. In some reaches, the water becomes so hostile to life that movement itself seems to stop. The stillness is not peaceful. It is historical. To descend there is to feel how temporary the surface can be. Coastlines move, worlds sink. Places that once echoed with dry footsteps end up beneath hundreds of feet of salt water, preserved and transformed at once. The cave remains, but its meaning changes with the age around it. Perhaps that is why drowned places affect us so deeply. They remind us that loss is not always destruction. Sometimes it is submersion. Sometimes the past remains almost perfectly intact, waiting below the level where ordinary life can reach it. And sometimes the most haunting thing about a hidden world is not that it vanished, but that it is still there, silently holding the shape of another Earth. What if a cave did not hide a place at all, but a sound we had forgotten how to hear? In the hills of southern France, the entrance to Chauvet Cave remains sealed for thousands of years, protected by a rockfall, as if chance itself had chosen to become a guardian. When it was rediscovered in 1994, the first surprise was not simply its age, though that alone was staggering. The paintings inside were more than 30,000 years old. The deeper surprise was their presence. They did not feel primitive. They felt immediate. Across the walls moved lions, horses, rhinos, bison. Their bodies overlapped in ways that suggested motion, sequence, even narrative. Shadows in the rock were used as part of the image, as though the painters were collaborating with the cave itself. These were not just records of animals. They were acts of attention. Someone had stood in the flicker of firelight, breathing mineral dust, and tried to carry the living world into darkness without losing its force. It is tempting to look at such art and see only distance, prehistory, early humanity, a vanished mind. But Chauvet resists that simplification. The artists were separated from us by immense time, yet their impulse is painfully familiar. To witness beauty, to mark fear, to preserve what moves us before it disappears. In that sense, the cave is not only an archaeological site, it is a room of recognition. And still, uncertainty remains. Why here? Why? Why descend into the earth to paint creatures that already roam the open world? Ritual, memory, storytelling, devotion. Each explanation offers part of the answer, never the whole of it. Perhaps the cave gave those images a different kind of reality. In darkness, firelight would have made them appear to move, to emerge, to almost breathe. That possibility lingers. Maybe art began not as decoration, but as conversation between human beings and the unknown. A way of standing inside mystery without needing to conquer it. In that sense, Chauvet is not only about what our ancestors saw, it is about what they understood, that sometimes the deepest places are where we go, not to hide from the world, but to feel more fully that we belong to it. It began, as many unsettling discoveries do, with a draft of air where no air should have been. In the Yucatan Peninsula, the ground often gives way without warning. Beneath the forest lies a hidden architecture of limestone, dissolved over ages by water until ceilings thin and collapse. The openings left behind are called cenotes, and to the Maya they were never just holes in the earth. They were thresholds, places of water, ceremony, offering, and fear. Looking down into them even now, through vines and reflected sky, it is easy to understand why. They feel less discovered than encountered. Divers entering certain cenotes found far more than clear pools and stone chambers. They found passageways stretching through darkness for miles, entire submerged cave systems threading beneath the jungle like buried veins. In some, human bones lay beside the remains of Ice Age animals, giant ground sloths, saber-toothed cats, creatures from a vanished climate. The same hidden world had received both the ancient dead and the very old living, preserving them in cold silence. That convergence changes the way time behaves. In the space of a single dum, one can move through layers that belong to different human meanings altogether. For one era, the cave was survival, a source of water. For another, it was sacred geography, a route toward gods or ancestors. For modern science, it became an archive of migration, extinction, and climate. The stone did not choose among these meanings. It simply held them all. And perhaps that is the deeper power of such places. We often divide the world too neatly, separating fact from reverence, evidence from story, science from myth. But underground, those boundaries blur. A chamber can be both physically measurable and spiritually charged. A pool can reveal chemistry, history, and grief at the same time of time. The cenotes remind us that human beings rarely approach mystery empty-handed. We bring our needs, our rituals, our explanations, yet the cave remains larger than any one of them. It receives every generation differently and returns the same lesson in another language. What sustains life can also deepen wonder. And what we call sacred may begin with the simple recognition that some places exceed our vocabulary. What if the earth could build its own cathedral, then hide it until someone was humble enough to enter quietly? In the desert of New Mexico, there is a cave that begins in darkness and then, almost impossibly, turns to light. Carlsbad Caverns does not reveal itself all at once. The descent is gradual, a long surrender through limestone corridors shaped drop by drop over immense stretches of time. Then the chambers open and scale begins to lose its usual meaning. Columns rise like frozen weather. Draperies of stone hang in folds delicate as fabric. Vast rooms seem less excavated than composed. Yet the beauty of Carlsbad is not only visual, it is chemical, patient, and nearly beyond imagination. Long before people named these formations, sulfuric acid was dissolving the rock from below, hollowing out great spaces in a process different from the simpler rainwater erosion that forms many caves. The result is a landscape that feels both organic and architectural, as if geology had studied human design and then quietly surpassed it. For those who first entered such spaces, language must have failed. Even now, names like Big Room and Hall of Giants are useful but insufficient. They describe size, not experience. To stand there is to feel corrected. The scale of the chamber rearranges the self. One's thoughts become smaller, but not in a humiliating way. Smaller in the way a voice softens in a library or beneath a night ski. And then there are the bats, pouring from the cave at dusk in dark ribbons, returning the underworld to the open air. They remind us that even the most hidden places are not sealed off from life above. There is exchange, rhythm, breath moving between worlds. Perhaps that is why monumental caves affect us so deeply. They are not ruins built by vanished civilizations, yet they inspire the same reverence. They suggest that grandeur does not require intention. The planet has been making chambers of wonder without audience, without applause, without need of us at all. To enter them is not to conquer anything. It is to witness creation on a timetable so vast that our only honest response may be gratitude, mixed with awe. It started with footsteps in mud that had hardened into testimony. Deep inside caves in what is now South Africa, researchers searching for fragments of our early ancestors found something more intimate than bone. They found chambers so narrow and difficult to reach that every movement had to be deliberate, every breath measured. And in those chambers, among ancient stone and darkness, lay the remains of Homo naledi, a small-brained human relative whose existence complicated the tidy story we like to tell about ourselves. At first, the discovery seemed to resist common expectation from every angle. The bodies had been placed far from daylight, in spaces difficult even for modern cavers to access. That raised an extraordinary possibility. Perhaps these beings, long before the rise of what we usually call advanced human culture, had chosen to return their dead to the dark with intention, not by accident, not by flood, but by ritual, or at least by a behavior that suggested care. That idea unsettled old assumptions. We are comfortable imagining evolution as a ladder, intelligence rising step by step until it reaches something like us. But caves rarely support simple ladders. They open sideways. They reveal branching paths, forgotten experiments, kinds of life that do not fit clean hierarchies. Homo naledi seemed to stand in one of those side passages, close enough to feel familiar, strange enough to disturb certainty. Even the cave itself became part of the meaning. To recover the fossils, scientists had to send slender, highly trained explorers through tight vertical shafts into near-total darkness. Discovery here was not triumphant in the usual sense. It required patience, collaboration, and a willingness to move carefully through physical and intellectual constraint. The cave taught method as much as it yielded evidence. And maybe that is the lasting lesson. Human origins were never a straight road leading inevitably to the present. They were a dense landscape of neighbors, cousins, survivors, and disappearances. In the dark, the past feels less like a monument and more like a gathering of unfinished lives. We are not only descended from certainty, we are descended from mystery, from variation, from forms of being human that history almost failed to remember. What if the most convincing doorway to another world was nothing more than water, stone, and the human need to believe that some losses must continue somewhere? At Cape Matapan, on the southern edge of Greece, the sea enters the land through caves that have carried legend for longer than memory can be measured. In the ancient imagination, this rugged coastline was associated with one of the entrances to Hades, not a place of theatrical torment, but the shadowed realm where the dead continued in another form. It is easy from a distance to call that mythology. It is harder to dismiss when standing before the cave itself, where the Mediterranean turns black beneath overhanging rock and the line between reflection and depth begins to disappear. Places like this rarely become sacred by accident. They gather meaning because the landscape already seems to speak a language the human mind recognizes. The cave mouth resembles a threshold. The sea moves in and out like breath. Sound changes, temperature changes, the ordinary rules of orientation loosen. One does not need to believe literally in an underworld to understand why ancient people felt they had reached the edge of one. And yet the enduring power of such caves lies not in whether the legend was true. It lies in what the legend reveals about us. Every civilization has searched for images capable of holding grief. We invent rivers to cross, gates to pass through, ferrymen to guide the lost. Not because we are naive, but because death is too large to leave shapeless. Myth gives contour to absence. It offers the living a geography for sorrow. That is where cave and story meet. A real opening in the earth becomes a vessel for an invisible problem. What happens to the self when the body is gone? Where does memory go when its voice has fallen silent? The cave cannot answer, but it gives the question the home. Perhaps that is why such sites still move us, even in secular centuries. We may no longer expect to find a kingdom of shades beneath the waves, yet we continue to stand at thresholds and feel the same old ache. We still want the world to contain a passage for the things we cannot bear to think simply vanish. It began with a map that was almost useless. Beneath the limestone hills of Vietnam, local farmers and loggers had long known of openings in the forest where cool air spilled from the ground. But the full scale of one of those openings remained hidden until a small team ventured inside and realized they were no longer exploring a cave in any ordinary sense. They had entered Son Doong, a passage so vast it seemed to contain its own weather, its own river, even its own horizon. Descriptions struggle here. The cave is more than large. It is disorientingly complete. Sections of the ceiling have collapsed over the ages, allowing sunlight to pour into chambers big enough for trees to grow. In those breaks, jungles have taken root underground. Mist drifts through the air. Clouds can form inside. Standing there, a person can feel the strange reversal of categories. The cave no longer seems like the hidden world. The surface does. What makes Son Doong so arresting is not only the size, but contradiction. We think of caves as enclosed, reduced, narrow places. Son Doong expands instead. It makes room for a landscape within a landscape, as if the earth had quietly folded one world inside another and waited for us to notice. The result feels less like discovery than correction. Our maps were never wrong exactly. They were simply incomplete, and with incompleteness comes humility. Even now, in an age of satellites and scanning technology, the planet can still shelter spaces that exceed our mental scale. There are still chambers large enough to undo certainty, places where light enters from above, but reaches something that has been hidden for ages. We are not as finished with discovery as we sometimes pretend. That may be the deeper significance of vast underground worlds. They remind us that wonder is not childish and ignorance is not always failure. Sometimes not knowing is the beginning of a more honest relationship with reality. The Earth is older, larger, and more inventive than the versions we carry in our routines. And every so often, a place like Doong opens in the dark and shows us that mystery has not receded. It has only been waiting for us to catch up. What if the strangest thing hidden in a cave was not an object, not a creature, but time itself behaving differently than we do on the surface? In the Nika mine in northern Mexico, miners cutting through deep rock opened a chamber that looked less like a natural cave than the interior of a frozen storm. Giant selenite crystals crossed the room in luminous beams, some longer than telephone poles, their surfaces milky and translucent, catching light with an almost tender glow. It was beautiful, but beauty was only the beginning. The conditions inside were nearly unlivable. Crushing heat, extreme humidity, air that turned each breath into labor. Human beings could enter only briefly, supported by specialized equipment, as if visiting a place not meant for our bodies. These crystals were not built quickly. They grew in darkness over immense spans of time, nourished by mineral-rich water kept at astonishingly stable temperatures. Where we measure life in decades, the cave measured growth in patience. Molecule by molecule, century by century, the chamber assembled structures so large they seemed designed, though no hand had shaped them. That contrast is difficult to ignore. We live in a culture of acceleration, trained to admire speed, efficiency, visible results. Nika offers another grammar entirely. Nothing in that chamber was hurried. Nothing performed for an audience. The crystals did not need to be seen to become extraordinary. They existed as a long, private conversation between chemistry and time, and yet, once discovered, they became vulnerable. Exposure alters what isolation preserved. Even careful study carries a kind of disturbance. This is the paradox of revelation. To know a hidden thing is often to change it. Science brings understanding, but it also reminds us that observation is rarely innocent. We arrive with instruments, curiosity, and reverence, but arrival itself leaves a mark. Perhaps that is why the Cave of the Crystals feels so moving. It confronts us with forms of creation that unfold beyond human urgency and beyond human comfort. It suggests that some of the most astonishing realities on Earth are not waiting for us in any personal sense. They simply happen, whether or not we are there to witness them. And maybe wisdom begins when we accept that wonder is not ours to own, only to encounter for a brief moment before the darkness closes gently around it again. It started with an absence. When archaeologists entered Denisova Cave in Siberia, they were not greeted by the kind of discovery that announces itself dramatically. No glittering chamber, no monumental structure, just layers of sediment, fragments of bone, traces so small they could have been overlooked by earlier generations. And yet from that modest darkness came one of the most profound revisions to the human story in modern science. A tiny finger bone, a few teeth, later a scattering of genetic clues. These were enough to reveal that the cave had once sheltered a population of ancient humans unknown to history. They were neither exactly Neanderthal nor exactly modern human. They belonged to a distinct lineage, now called the Denisovans, whose existence had been hidden not by distance alone, but by the fragility of evidence itself. Their bodies had nearly vanished. Their presence survived in molecules. There is something quietly astonishing about that. For centuries, history favored the visible. Monuments, tools, skeletons, inscriptions. Denisova Cave showed that identity can persist even when form does not. A genome recovered from ancient remains opened a door that architecture never could. Suddenly, the human past was not a sequence of isolated species replacing one another in neat order. It was overlap, encounter, interwoven inheritance. We did not emerge alone. We emerged among others, and we still carry pieces of them. The cave became more than a site. It became a mirror for a humbling truth, that our origins are plural. Across tens of thousands of years, different human groups met, mingled, adapted, disappeared. Some left tools, some left art, some left almost nothing but genetic echoes in living populations spread across Asia and Oceania. The silence around them had never meant they were absent. only that we had not yet learned how to listen. Perhaps that is the deeper lesson of Denisova Cave. Memory is not always stored in stories. Sometimes it waits in the body, passed forward invisibly through generations who do not know the names of those they carry. In that sense, the cave did not simply reveal a lost people. It revealed how incomplete our self-portrait has always been, and how much of who we are may come from ancestors we are only now beginning to remember. What if the deepest caves do not lead us outward into strange worlds, but inward toward the edges of our own endurance? In the Caucasus Mountains of Georgia lies Chauvet Cave, one of the deepest known on Earth. To speak of depth in ordinary numbers hardly prepares the mind for what that means. More than 2 kilometers below the surface, the cave descends through shafts, meanders, squeezes, and flooded passages into a darkness so complete it seems to absorb not only light, but time. There is no grandeur in the usual cinematic sense, no easy beauty. What waits there is something starker, the raw architecture of descent. Explorers who enter such places do not simply visit them, they commit to them. Every rope, every anchor, every ration, every battery becomes part of a fragile system standing between human life and geological indifference. Progress is measured in careful movements, in the discipline not to hurry. Underground camps are built on ledges of stone where exhaustion settles into the body like cold. Days pass without sunrise. The mind begins to rely on clocks because the world no longer offers any other measure. And still people go. Not because depth itself is a prize, though records attract attention. They go because some questions can only be answered through encounter. How far does the earth open? What forms of water and stone exist where almost no one has stood? What happens to the human spirit when familiar reference points fall away? In the deepest caves, exploration becomes a conversation with limit. That conversation is rarely romantic. It includes fear, error, and sometimes tragedy. The underground does not forgive carelessness, and it does not bend to ambition. In that sense, caves like Chauvet strip away illusion. They reveal how dependent we are on one another, on preparation, on trust. Every descent is collective, even when the darkness feels intensely personal. Perhaps that is the hidden meaning of the deepest places. We imagine depth as isolation, yet what it often teaches is interdependence. The farther we go from the surface, the less the myth of the solitary hero survives. In the end, the cave asks something quieter and more demanding. Not whether we are brave enough to conquer the unknown, but whether we are humble enough to meet it together. It began with a rumor so old it no longer belonged to any one culture. Somewhere beneath the earth, people have always imagined there must be a hidden repository, a chamber of lost wisdom, buried records, sacred objects, the memory of a civilization that knew something we have forgotten. In one age, it is a library swallowed by sand. In another, a sealed monastery archive. In another still, a cave filled with scrolls, symbols, or maps that might explain who we were before history narrowed into official versions. Most of these stories remain unproven. Some are almost certainly inventions, and yet they endure with remarkable force. That endurance tells us something important. The dream of hidden knowledge is rarely about treasure in the ordinary sense. It is about incompleteness. We sense, perhaps correctly, that every generation inherits only part of the human story. Wars burn archives. Floods erase settlements. Languages disappear. Whole systems of thought vanish not because they were false, but because they were fragile. A cave in that imagination becomes the perfect counterimage to loss. Cool, sealed, patient, capable of preserving what the surface forgets. History offers partial echoes of this hope. Scrolls found near desert caves, ritual objects recovered from underground chambers, art and burials preserved where weather could not reach them. Enough truth exists to keep the larger metaphor alive. Perhaps somewhere we think something essential still waits intact. Not a secret that would change the world overnight, but a missing page that might soften our arrogance about the present. And maybe that is the healthiest way to understand these long-lived legends. Not as promises of revelation, but as reminders of restraint. We know much, yet not enough. We preserve some things, lose others, misread still more. The hidden archive beneath the earth may be real in a few places and symbolic in countless others, But either way, it reflects a profoundly human hunger, the wish that meaning has not all been scattered beyond recovery. In the end, the cave stands for memory under pressure, a place where what survives does so quietly. And perhaps the real question is not whether a final chamber of lost knowledge exists, but whether we are becoming the kind of civilization that knows how to protect what should not be lost again. In the end, the caves do not answer the questions that brought us to them. They deepen them. We began with openings in the earth and the old feeling they provoke, that somewhere below the mapped world, another reality continues without us. Along the way, those hidden places became many things. A sealed ecosystem in Romania, living beyond sunlight. A drowned chamber in Belize, carrying the memory of vanished coastlines. Painted walls in France, where ancient hands left motion inside stone. Sacred wells in the Yucatan, where ritual and survival shared the same water. Vast caverns in New Mexico and Vietnam, where geology expanded into something almost architectural. Fossils, genes, myths, crystals, and depths beyond comfort, each one a different kind of threshold. What ties them together is not proof of a secret world in any sensational sense. It is something quieter and perhaps more profound. Caves reveal that reality is always larger than the version we inhabit day to day. Beneath the routines of the surface lies another tempo of existence, measured in mineral growth, underground rivers, extinctions, adaptations, and memory preserved by accident. These places remind us how thin the familiar world can be. They also expose a human constant. Wherever darkness opens, we carry the same needs into it: to search, to name, to grieve, to imagine, to preserve. We turn caves into laboratories, sanctuaries, tombs, archives, stories. Sometimes we find evidence. Sometimes we find only ourselves reflected in the mystery. But even that is not a failure. It may be one of the oldest purposes of exploration, not merely to uncover what is hidden, but to understand why hidden things matter to us at all. Perhaps that is the lasting gift of these descents. They teach proportion. We are ingenious but partial, curious but never finished. The world is still making itself beneath our feet, and much of it will remain beyond our reach. Yet maybe wisdom does not begin when every darkness is illuminated. Maybe it begins when we can stand at the threshold, feel awe without ownership, and accept that some truths are valuable precisely because they ask us to remain humble in their presence.